The writing is on the wall for Trey Lance. It's over for him, at least in San Francisco. The 49ers came into this offseason with a big question mark at quarterback. Now, that probably wouldn't have been the case if Brock Purdy didn't tear his UCL in the NFC Championship game. He played well last season once he took over as the starter. He went 5-0 in the regular season and did win 2 games in the playoffs too. Now, I don't think he's necessarily anything crazy, but he didn't turn it over and made smart decisions, and sometimes that's all you need, especially with how good the Niners roster is. Now, we know that he'll start week 1. Kyle Shanahan said that he would have to literally melt in practice to lose the job. But first, thank you to DraftKings for sponsoring today's video. Do you want to get in on the fantasy action this season but are sick of roster management? This year, best ball on DraftKings is bigger than ever. You just draft your team once at the beginning of the season in a snake draft. Then each week you'll automatically rack up points from the top scorers on your team, and there is no roster management to worry about. To start playing best ball, download the DraftKings app, sign up using our code JDP, enter DraftKings Best Ball $10 million contest, and draft your team for the season. Each week you'll automatically rack up points from your top scorers, no ads, drops, or I should have played him instead. You'll be able to enjoy the fantasy football action without having to manage your team. The team with the most points at the end of the season will take home the $1 million top prize. So what are you waiting for? Head over to the DraftKings app and sign up using the code JDP and start playing best ball today. Only at DraftKings with code JDP. Thanks again to DraftKings, and let's get right back to the video. Clearly, Brock Purdy is back healthy and is expected to be the guy going forward, but what does that mean for Trey Lance? He's entering his 3rd year in the pros, and he's only started in 4 games. San Francisco drafted Trey Lance in 2021, 3rd overall. He was supposed to be the future guy for the Niners, but that's not how it's gone at all. Lance was considered pretty raw coming out of North Dakota State. He did only start 1 season there, but he was really good. He won the FCS championship, completed 66.9% of his throws with 28 touchdowns, and rushed for 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns. But really, what was the most impressive thing is that he didn't throw a pick. Not a single one. He was explosive, and he looked to have a really bright future in the pros, but it hasn't worked out. When he was drafted by the Niners, they still had Jimmy Garoppolo, who just 2 seasons before took them to the Super Bowl. Now, he was hurt for a lot of 2020, and that's probably a big reason why they drafted Lance, but then Jimmy G mostly stayed healthy and took them to another NFC Championship game. Lance still did end up starting in 2 games because of injuries to Garoppolo and had 6 appearances. He went 1-1 in his starts and overall completed 41 of 71 passes for 600 yards and 5 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. Then on the ground, he had 168 yards and a touchdown. That was enough for the 49ers to want to have him take over as the starter last season. He had a year to sit and learn, and it was time, but his time didn't last very long. In week 1, he completed 13 of 28 passes for 164 yards and an interception, and he had 54 yards rushing. It was a tough game to actually evaluate his play though, because they played the Bears in a damn monsoon. Week 2 was going to be a better way to actually know what he was going to look like in year 2, and then he suffered a season-ending ankle injury. Jimmy Garoppolo took over and played well, and the 49ers were winning. Then he broke his foot, and that opened the door for Brock Purdy. It's funny because Lance was taken 3rd overall and was supposed to be the future. Instead, it looks like the future is Brock Purdy, who was literally taken with the last pick in the 2022 draft. And Kyle Shanahan clearly prefers him over Lance at this point. I've been very pro Trey Lance. I loved him coming out of college, and I thought he had all of those raw tools to be really successful at the next level, but man, it's just been disappointing. I thought he looked rough in the first week of the preseason. Even his touchdown pass was really ugly. It should have been intercepted. He just ends up getting super lucky. He's got an open guy on a post, and it looks like a very hard throw. He ends up just throwing it behind his man, and the defender should have picked it, but didn't. Clearly, there's a reason he's a DB and not a wideout. Then the tight end somehow catches it off the bounce. That was a freak play, obviously, but it was just a lot of bad for Lance overall. I think he's just pretty slow at progressing on the field. He's not making the right reads, and it's costing him. Even on his first play of the game, he just doesn't make the right decision. He has an open receiver on a comeback to his right, and that's his first read. He ends up not going to him, and then doesn't even get it out to his check down who was open and gets sacked. Just slow processing. 2 plays later on 3rd down, he gets sacked again when he shouldn't. He has the tight end open and decides not to pull it and gets sacked. Trey Lance just didn't look decisive at all and looked slow. I still think Trey Lance has a lot of raw talent, and he is only 23 years old. He is probably good enough to be in the league for a while, but he's certainly not turned into what the 49ers had hoped. But how much of that is actually his fault? One of the biggest problems for Trey Lance is literally just that he hasn't played. Since high school, he's only started in 21 games, 17 in college, 4 in the pros. You see a lot of quarterbacks learn behind another guy, but for some it is better to just be out there and learn. That's how Josh Allen improved, and the same goes for Trevor Lawrence. They were thrown out into the fire and it benefited them. Lance hasn't just not gotten consistent game reps, but he's missed plenty of time hurt too. I had high expectations for him coming into last season and thought he was going to be really good, but now we'll really never know what that could have been. If he stays healthy, he's the guy, and Brock Purdy probably never sees the field last year. I'll say this too, I think Trey Lance is still more rawly talented than Brock Purdy, but that doesn't matter. Look at the 49ers for the past few seasons. They've consistently been in the conference championship, and it's been without a truly elite quarterback. Kyle Shanahan could obviously use an amazing quarterback, but he can win without one, and he has. And I think if Lance was put in that Shanahan scheme with that talent for a full season, he would have been good, but it doesn't matter now. He's not just stuck behind Purdy, he may be behind Sam Darnold now too. Sam Darnold is a really talented passer, and he's that older veteran to just replace Jimmy Garoppolo, but if he steps into the starting role, I think he's going to succeed. It'd be by far the best supporting cast he's had in the pros. The Jets were a disaster when he was there, and the Panthers had a lot of problems and were really in the midst of a rebuild by the end of his time there. There are a lot of quarterbacks in the league that could succeed on the 49ers, and that's for a bunch of different reasons. The defense is really, really good, and that already is going to have a ton to do with team success, but being a quarterback is never easy. But it is easiest in San Francisco because Kyle Shanahan is a wizard, and that offense is stacked. The 49ers have so many players just on the offense that could be the focal point on a different team. Christian McCaffrey came over last season before the deadline and immediately made a huge impact. They were stacked before they brought him in, and then they brought in arguably the best running back in football. So yeah, you'd expect that to go well, and it did. McCaffrey only played in 11 games with the Niners and had 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns from scrimmage. He was a beast as expected, and he won't even have to carry the full load this year either if Elijah Mitchell can stay healthy all season. In the passing game, I'm a full believer that the 49ers have 2 legit #1 wide receivers, which is an amazing problem to have. Deebo Samuel is the big name. He's obviously had his problems with injuries, but in his only 16-game season, he had 1,400 receiving yards and rushed for 365 too. He's been kind of a weird hybrid player, but he's really good wherever Shanahan lines him up. Then Brandon Ayuk is one of the most underrated targets in the league. He's legit and is coming off of his first 1,000-yard season. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he eventually was considered the top receiver in San Francisco. At tight end, George Kittle is the best tight end in the league, not named Travis Kelce. He had 11 touchdowns last season, and oh yeah, he's a ruthless blocker too, like the 49ers needed any more help. They have a good offensive line, and you could argue that Trent Williams is the best player on the roster because he's one of the best in the league at any position. If this era of the 49ers does not win a Super Bowl, it's going to be a complete failure. They are a team with a great head coach, an elite defense, and a stacked offense. There are literally only 2 things that can slow them down: injuries, which have, and quarterback play. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Trey Lance does end up playing at some point this season. But for right now, he should absolutely be the 3rd string. And who knows, that could end up being his final straw in San Francisco.